Hey guys! Tonight we slip into iron armour still warm from the sun, lace up a pair of painfully fashionable pointy leather boots, and find ourselves kneeling in a torchlit chapel, hands trembling, heart pounding, sweat pooling under wool and chainmail. You're about to swear an oath. Not to a king. Not even to God, really. This is an oath to a man. Your fellow knight. Your battle brother. And whether or not anyone says it out loud, there's a whole lot more going on here than loyalty and swordplay. A priest recites Latin while you press your palm to another man's chest, right over his heartbeat. You lock eyes. You repeat ancient words. And just like that, your lives are bound together. Soulmates? Blood brothers? Lovers in all but name? The line isn't just blurry, it's practically non-existent. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Rule. You're inducted into a knightly order tonight, but this isn't just a military ceremony. It feels more like a secret society. Think high-stakes Dungeons and Dragons with real swords and deeply personal vibes. You kneel, swear oaths, maybe drink from the same chalice. At least 2 hands are touching you at all times. Your armour's off. Your guard's down. The whole thing radiates an intimacy that would make modern bros sprint for the exit. These ceremonies, common in medieval Europe, had layered meanings. On the surface, loyalty, protection, fealty. Beneath that, emotional bonds so deep they practically hummed with energy. Historians still argue whether these brotherhood rituals were strictly platonic or something more. The language was slippery, full of devotion and sacrifice, but also longing. Some accounts even included blessings that asked God to treat the pair as one soul. Mainstream fact. Brother-making ceremonies, also called adelphopoiesis in the Eastern Church, were real, well documented, and solemn. They sometimes mirrored marriage rites. In some cases, they literally were marriage rites, disguised to slip past church scrutiny. In others, they were genuine expressions of deep, emotional alliances, formed in a world where war could end you before sunset. Fringe tidbit. In one dusty Greek manuscript from the 10th century, 2 soldiers were united in such a ceremony and buried together in a shared tomb, with joined hands chiselled onto their gravestone. Not exactly subtle, and certainly not just roommates. The location matters, too. Often, these oaths happened in chapels, in front of altars. Candles. Incense. Choirs if you were rich. You might think you're attending a wedding. You wouldn't be wrong. And afterward? You don't just ride off. No, you feast. Toast. Sometimes sleep in the same bed that night, as a symbolic consummation. Again, yes, that actually happened. This nightly intimacy wasn't isolated. The structure of medieval society allowed, even encouraged, homosocial bonding on a scale that modern life rarely replicates. It wasn't just okay to express devotion to another man, it was expected. You were supposed to trust him with your life, your secrets, your soul. Tenderness was proof of strength. Of course, not everyone clapped politely. Church authorities occasionally raised eyebrows, then lowered them fast if the men involved were noble or useful. One monk in 12th century France complained that knights were kissing each other like lovers in public. His tone was alarmed, jealous, and possibly both. But that didn't stop it. Even the literature of the time couldn't help itself. In some Arthurian romances, knights fall into love with each other. That word was used. Love. You'd find lines like, "He loved him more than any living thing," or "Their hearts were bound like ivy to stone." That's not bromance. That's poetry in full bloom. What you're living through tonight isn't weird for the Middle Ages. If anything, it's orthodox. This was a time before the invention of the modern heterosexual binary. People didn't label desire the way we do now. If you loved someone, man or woman, you acted on it or you didn't, but the world around you didn't always ask for a label. That came later. Right now, all anyone sees is a bond so fierce it can only be spiritual, physical, or both. You stand, your hand still in his, and the oath complete. You're no longer just comrades. You're something else now. Something sacred. Something with rules and rituals, and maybe a little kissing. You wake up with straw in your hair, armour clanking gently as you stretch in the cold stone barracks. Across the room, your fellow knight is already buckling his greaves, humming some ancient battle hymn that's halfway between a lullaby and a war cry. You catch his eye. He tosses you a chunk of bread. You nod. Nothing said, but everything is. Because this isn't just a job. It's a code. And that code? It's giving big, emotionally available male protagonist energy. The code of chivalry. Sounds dramatic, right? You picture galloping horses, clanging swords, long flowing capes. And sure, all that's part of it. But underneath the theatrics is something softer. Something that feels surprisingly tender. Chivalry wasn't just about fighting fair. It was about loyalty, courtesy, humility, and above all, devotion. You weren't just supposed to protect the weak. You were supposed to love fiercely, suffer nobly, and treat your fellow knights with a kind of reverence. Emotional control wasn't prized. Emotional expression was mainstream fact. The chivalric code, especially as laid out in 12th and 13th century knightly manuals, called for affection, even adoration, between men of equal standing. The knight was an emotional creature, not just a hardened killer. He wept when his comrades died. He sang when they triumphed. And he was expected to show devotion in both word and deed. So when your comrade falls in battle, and you cradle his bloodied head in your lap while the world blurs around you, that isn't weakness. It's the code. You whisper his name, kiss his forehead, and vow vengeance. And no one questions your masculinity. They call it honour. Fringe tidbit. There's a 13th century romance where a knight literally dies of grief after his beloved companion is killed in battle. Not his wife. Not his mistress. His fellow knight. He builds a tomb, carves their initials into the stone, and lays down beside it to never wake up. Medieval Romeo / Juliet, but way more chainmail. Historians still argue whether this kind of narrative was metaphor or reality. Was it just flowery language? A storytelling device? Or was it a coded way to acknowledge bonds the church would rather not talk about? And that's the thing. The line between affection and romance wasn't policed the same way then. Two knights could be inseparable, share clothes, letters, beds, tears, and still be seen as paragons of masculinity. You and your comrade ride into a town and no one raises an eyebrow when you hold his hand during prayer. No one flinches when you brush dust from his cheek or help him undress after battle, your fingers careful over bruises you pretend not to notice. Tenderness was everywhere. Stoicism was not. Even the way you spoke to each other was soft. Honorifics, poetic names, inside jokes. Think my brave lion or sweet sword brother. Stuff that would get you roasted in a modern group chat, but here, it's just Thursday. There's a famous account of a knightly duel, two warriors forced to fight, both in love with the same woman. Except halfway through, they drop their swords, fall into each other's arms, and start weeping. They confess how much they mean to each other and renounce the duel entirely. The woman marries someone else. The two knights ride off together. That's not even subtext. That's text. It's tempting to modernize this, to label it, but that would miss the point. These were people living in a world with entirely different emotional expectations. Masculinity was performative, yes, but not in the toxic, chest-thumping way. A real man, according to your knightly handbook, had friends he would die for, and sometimes cry for. You mount your horse, side by side with him. You don't speak. You don't need to. The sun is high, the road is long, and your bond is steel. You ride on, the breeze catching the edge of your cloak, and you remember something strange he said last night by the fire. Something soft. About not knowing what life means without you. You didn't answer. Just looked at the flames, chewing on a bit of salted meat. But now, the words won't leave you. You start to say something, to return the sentiment, but then he turns to you, grins, and tosses a pebble at your head. You're sulking, he says. You scowl. He laughs. The moment passes. Still, that warmth in your chest, that ache when you picture him gone, that's part of being a knight, too. You've never knelt this long in your life. The velvet cushion beneath your knees is digging into your shins like it's angry. Across from you, a nobleman, technically your equal, but currently looking 10 times more fabulous, raises his hem and reveals a flash of thigh. He doesn't flinch. Neither does the audience. Your fingers tremble as you fasten a silk garter around his leg. This is not a euphemism. It's the mid-1300s, and you're being inducted into the Order of the Garter, one of the most prestigious knightly orders in Europe. The elite of the elite. Kings, princes, lords, and just a sprinkle of mysterious hot commoners with suspiciously good hair. And for reasons that absolutely defy straight logic, the whole thing revolves around legwear. Mainstream fact. The Order of the Garter was founded by King Edward III of England around 1348. Its origin story, according to the official version, involves a noblewoman dropping her garter at a ball. The king retrieves it, ties it to his own leg, and utters the now famous phrase, "Honi soit qui mal y pense," shame on him who thinks evil of it. The crowd gasps. The rest is history. But that's just the sanitized version. There's another layer beneath the velvet. You're kneeling to honor a man. You're physically touching him. The ceremony includes robes, oaths, whispered phrases in French. The air is thick with incense and implications. The intimacy of the moment isn't just symbolic, it's strategic. This is how you build loyalty that goes beyond politics. You bind people emotionally, viscerally. You make it feel like something more than governance. Fringe tidbit. There's a 15th century description of one garter ceremony that included a kiss of peace between the inductee and his sponsor. Not a handshake. Not a fist bump. A literal kiss, on the lips or the cheek, depending on the rank and vibe. Historians still argue whether these rituals were intentionally sensual or just accidentally extra. Some believe the Order of the Garter was meant to mimic earlier knightly brotherhoods that blurred spiritual and romantic devotion. Others insist it was all about spectacle, no different than modern award shows, just with more sword fights. But here you are, garters in hand, knees on the marble. The whole thing reeks of ceremony, power, and unspoken subtext. The garter itself, blue silk, with a gold-embroidered motto. You fasten it just above his knee. It's symbolic, they say. It represents restraint, honour, courage. Sure. Tell that to your heartbeat. The entire audience watches you. The room is candlelit and hushed. And when you finish tying the garter, your knight places his hand over yours, not aggressively, just long enough to say, "I see you." You rise together. You exchange a look that no scribe will ever bother to record. And suddenly, you get it. This whole system isn't about subtlety. It's about controlled vulnerability. You're performing loyalty in a way that's half politics, half poetry. Everyone in the room is in on it. Nobody says it out loud, but everyone feels it. It's not just about war or feudal hierarchy. It's about creating a space where men can express devotion with their whole chests. You don't hide it. You ritualize it. And let's be honest, The robes don't hurt. Deep blue velvet with wide collars, silver chains, and that single garter strapped high. Some historians call it regal. Others call it theatrical. You're thinking, if this isn't a drag show for dudes with swords, I don't know what is. Sevens, later that night, at the banquet, you and the other newly inducted knights toast with gold goblets. You laugh too loud. You catch your knight watching you. He looks away. You feel the heat crawl up your neck. You wonder what happens if you follow him out of the hall and down the darkened stone corridor. You wonder who's watching. You wonder if you care. Tomorrow, you ride back to the field. You'll kill men. You'll bury friends. But tonight, you sip wine beside him and feel something closer than blood. You stand at the edge of a battlefield, sunlight bouncing off a sea of polished armour. Somewhere behind you, a banner flaps in the wind, your crest, your colours, your house. But in front of you, your fellow knights, your friends. Your ride or die is in chainmail, and just before you charge into what might be your last day on Earth, you do something deeply, wildly medieval. Sevens, you kiss them. On the cheek, the lips, the helmet. Depends on the vibe. But yes, it's absolutely normal. In medieval Europe, especially in France and Italy, the custom of male knights greeting each other with kisses wasn't just accepted, it was expected. A sign of respect, brotherhood, and emotional solidarity before potentially getting skewered by a guy with a spear. Mainstream fact. The kiss of peace, or pax, was standard in both religious and secular settings. It showed up at church services, nightly ceremonies, diplomatic meetings, and, yes, right before battle. It wasn't rare, it was required. Knights would kiss one another before duels, before oaths, before executing orders. In some places, not doing it could be interpreted as an insult, or worse, a sign of cowardice. So before the horn sounds, you lean over and press your forehead to his. You whisper something dumb, maybe a joke, maybe a prayer. He laughs, quietly. Then he leans in and kisses your cheek, firm and unafraid. It's not even weird. That's the thing. This world has a different framework for masculinity. You can wrap your arm around another man's waist. You can stroke his hair while he cries. You can spoon him under a blanket to stay warm. And no one calls it anything but honourable. Fringe tidbit. In a 14th century Italian military manual, there's a whole section on ritual embraces among soldiers. The author describes different types of kisses, from quick and noble to lingering and intense. He doesn't even flinch. He just tells you which one is best suited for war versus diplomacy. You read it and think, who needs Netflix when this is real history? Historians still argue whether these kisses were purely symbolic or charged with more personal meaning. Was it just an over-the-top way to show loyalty? Or were these pre-battle moments also cover for something deeper, something quietly romantic? Either way, you're not analysing it. You're in it. You and your closest comrade, let's call him Alric, ride side by side as the enemy charges. You could die in minutes. So you share that kiss, that pressure of lips against cheek, and it's not about lust. It's about certainty. You know where you belong. You know who you'd die for. It's probably him. And it's not just battle. You kiss each other hello. Goodbye. After victories. After funerals. Knights developed entire systems of physical communication to express emotion. Think of it as the medieval version of I got you, bro, but with slightly more tongue and zero sarcasm. You camp together under open skies, sharing stories and bread. When Alric gets injured, you clean his wound yourself. When you feel that pit in your stomach, like maybe this life of endless war and pressure and performative honour is just too much, he's the one who squeezes your hand without words. He's your lifeline. And that intimacy, it's not weakness. It's survival. Even the church got in on this. During Mass, the priest would offer a kiss of peace to a deacon, who would pass it down the line. One kiss, then another. One night to the next. A chain of closeness, trust, and vulnerability stretching through rows of iron and prayer. Imagine a holy game of telephone, except instead of words, it's lips. That's how seriously they took emotional bonding. But modern eyes don't always get it. We've built walls between romantic and platonic, between straight and not. They didn't. And in many ways, they were freer for it. Here in the medieval world, your lips on his isn't shocking. It's comforting. It's code. It says, I'll ride with you. I'll fall with you. I won't leave you. Sevens. And when you do charge, when the trumpets scream and horses thunder beneath you, you don't feel fear. You feel him at your side. His presence steadies your sword. His breath is your rhythm. His kiss still lingers on your cheek. You're cold. Like medieval cold. The kind of cold that seeps through wool, rattles your bones, and makes you seriously question why chainmail isn't just made of heated blankets. You and your squire huddle in a tent the size of a horse trough, tucked beneath a single blanket that smells like wet sheep and old battles. There's no fire. There's no space. There's just the two of you. And this was always the plan. See, in the medieval world, bed sharing was normal, expected, even, not in a wink-wink way, though sometimes that, too, but in a practical, this is how we stay alive way. You travel with your squire or fellow knight. You sleep in the same bed. Always. No questions asked. Mainstream fact. Shared sleeping arrangements were routine across all levels of society in the Middle Ages. Peasants piled into one bed, servants slept near their lords, and travelling companions, especially soldiers, shared sleeping quarters as a matter of necessity. A private bed. That was a luxury reserved for royalty or very rich monks. Everyone else snuggled up. Which means, tonight, you're curled up next to your squire. Let's call him Thomas. He's a lanky, sarcastic, irritatingly handsome lad with calloused hands and no sense of personal space. You've trained him to polish your armour, sharpen your sword, and, on nights like this, steal all the covers and then pretend he didn't. You grumble, elbow him. He elbows back. You both laugh, quietly. Then the silence settles in. Outside, wind howls across the hills like a wounded thing. Inside, your breath comes in soft puffs that fog the air between you. He shifts. You shift. His knee bumps yours and doesn't move away. Fringe tidbit. In one 15th century noble household, there was a logbook documenting bed-sharing arrangements down to the night. Certain pairs of knights were recorded as always sleeping in the same bed, even when multiple beds were available. Some chroniclers found this odd. Others found it obvious. One simply noted, they slept together, as always. Historians still argue whether these arrangements were purely pragmatic or reflected deeper relationships. After all, the Middle Ages weren't devoid of desire, they just didn't dissect it the same way we do now. If Thomas pulls you close for warmth, is that friendship? Intimacy? Both? You're too tired to care. And the thing is, you trust him. You fought beside him. He's wiped blood from your face. He knows where you keep the letter from your mother. He's the only one who's seen you cry since that disastrous siege last autumn. Tonight, that shared blanket might as well be a fortress wall. You hear whispers outside the tent, other men laughing, gossiping, playing dice. Someone coughs. A horse nickers. The world goes on. But in here, it's just the rise and fall of your chests, the slow rhythm of breath sinking up. It's quiet. Safe. Thomas murmurs something in half sleep. You don't catch the words, just the tone. Tender, dream-soaked. His arm drapes across your chest. You could push it off. You don't. Because here's the truth. Emotional closeness was a given in knightly life. You were trained to protect one another, die for one another, and yes, sleep beside one another. Whether that intimacy tipped into romance was beside the point. The bond was the bond. In some orders, knights were forbidden from sleeping alone, not out of fear of sin, but out of fear of loneliness. Solitude was dangerous. It bred weakness. But a shared bed meant connection, stability, a reminder that someone had your back, even in dreams. So tonight, you drift towards sleep with the weight of Tomas's hand over your heart. His breath warms your collarbone. You remember the way he looked at you during training yesterday. Exasperated, amused, maybe. Something more. But you won't name it. Not yet. Because in this world, everything lives in that tender in-between. Sleep takes you slowly, cradled in the quiet hum of rain on canvas, the steady heartbeat beside you, and the faint scent of wood smoke in his hair. You wake before the sun, light barely licking the edge of the tent flap. Tomas is still curled against you, mouth slightly open, one hand fisted in the fabric of your tunic like he dreamt of clinging to something solid. You gently pry his fingers loose, mostly to avoid the inevitable teasing, and slip outside, blinking into the pale grey of morning. You're on campaign, between battles, and someone has already lit a fire. You smell ash and boiled oats. But your mind is somewhere else. Because last night, before sleep tangled around you both, Tomas handed you something. A letter. He said it wasn't important, just something dumb he scribbled while waiting for the blacksmith. But you saw the way his ears flushed red. You saw how he couldn't meet your eyes. So now, alone by the fire, you read it. It's not dumb. It's painfully sweet, awkward, a little clumsy. He compares your swordplay to poetry. Says you make him feel safe in a world that isn't. And near the end, there's a line that hits harder than any warhammer. Sevens. I don't know what this is, but if you leave, I don't want to stay behind. Sevens. You fold the letter, press it to your lips, and feel the ground shift under your boots. Mainstream fact. Medieval knights were prolific writers. Many were literate, especially those in the upper ranks, and they wrote letters constantly. Some were formal, but many read like deeply personal journals. Emotions weren't rationed. In fact, flowery, expressive language was admired, even expected. Some letters between knights read like love notes, even when the word love isn't used outright. They spoke of longing, absence, dreams, and the unbearable ache of separation. It's hard not to read between the lines when one knight tells another he can't sleep without hearing his voice. Fringe tidbit. One preserved letter from the 14th century features a knight referring to his companion as my soul's twin, and includes a small pressed flower between the parchment folds. It was found among a collection of military documents. Some archivists probably dropped their quill reading it. Historians still argue whether these letters were sincere expressions of romantic love or simply the literary style of the time. Was this just the way people wrote? Was it performative affection, or something deeper? Some say we project modern labels backward. Others argue that these letters speak for themselves, and loudly. Either way, you're living it now. Tomas joins you at the fire, squinting sleepily, hair sticking up at tragic angles. You don't mention the letter. You just hand him a chunk of bread. He takes it. Your fingers brush. Neither of you looks away. Later, while cleaning your armour, you remember another letter, one you wrote years ago. It was for a knight you trained under. You never sent it. You told him he inspired you. You told him his laugh made you feel less alone. You told him, carefully, indirectly, that you loved him. You burned it, of course, but you remember every word. Now, in the present, you watch Tomas joke with another knight across the camp, and feel something simmer low in your chest. Not jealousy, exactly. Just a knowing that your heart has chosen a place to rest, and it's not on the battlefield. That night, When the camp quiets and the stars slice through the sky, you add your own letter to your pack. It's not long, just a few lines, but you write it carefully, every stroke deliberate. If we make it through this, I won't waste another year pretending I don't feel this. Yours, if you'll have me. 7s. You fold it. Hide it. For now, because knights don't just carry swords, they carry secrets. And sometimes, those secrets are beautiful. The monastery smells like old parchment, candle wax, and whatever's fermenting in the basement that definitely isn't wine, but also definitely is wine. You arrived here broken from battle, armour-dented, ribs bruised, mind fraying at the edges, and were offered peace. Sort of. You thought you were stepping into holy solitude. A monk's life. Silence, prayer, maybe a bit of quiet gardening. Instead, you've walked into what feels like the Middle Ages' most intense group chat, except everyone's wearing robes and nobody's allowed to have fun. Officially, unofficially, it's a different story. You're not in the abbey a full day before you start noticing things. The way Brother Mathieu lingers a little too long while adjusting your scapula, the not-so-accidental brush of fingertips during prayer, the unspoken tension in the scriptorium that has nothing to do with ink smudges. Turns out, the monastery is basically a medieval gay dorm. Mainstream fact. Monastic life offered structure, education, and protection, but it also offered privacy. Behind stone walls, men lived together, worked together, prayed together, and yes, slept together. Many medieval monasteries used communal dormitories, with rows of beds or even shared sleeping mats. Emotional and physical intimacy wasn't just common, it was inescapable. This close, this cut off from the outside world, people formed bonds, deep ones. And sometimes, those bonds moved past the spiritual. Fringe tidbit. A 12th century abbot once wrote in his personal journal that he had to confess again the sin of touching Brother Henri as he slept. It wasn't part of the official record. Just a quiet scribble, tucked between pages on wheat prices and candle expenditures. But it's there. A crack in the perfect stone facade. Historians still argue whether monastic intimacy was tolerated, policed, or quietly ignored. Official church doctrine condemned sodomy, a broad and often wildly misinterpreted category, but enforcement varied wildly. In many monasteries, such matters were handled internally with penance, whispered warnings, or strategic reshuffling of dorm assignments. You quickly learn that everyone has a friend. Brother Lucien and Brother Johann always sit next to each other at meals. They share a single cup of water during fasts. They've memorised each other's Latin psalms. You and Brother Ansel, he's the one with the sharp jawline and calligraphy skills that make you question the existence of straight lines, are assigned to the herb garden. You dig up roots while he hums Gregorian chants. He shows you how to crush mint with the heel of your hand, how to steep lavender for calming tea. You joke that it's oddly romantic. He doesn't laugh, just looks at you, dead serious, and says, "Is it odd?" 7s. You don't know how to answer. That night, he brings you an extra blanket. You don't need it, but you take it. His hand lingers a moment too long. Again, you sleep in rows, heads facing east, feet west. But Ansel's foot brushes yours in the dark. Once. Then again. Neither of you pulls away. There are rules here. But there's also something older than rules. Something the church can't quite fence in. The monks sing of divine love, of holy longing, of the soul's thirst for union. They chant in Latin about hearts pierced by desire. And sometimes, when the candles burn low and no one else is listening, they look at each other like they mean it. In one of your nightly readings, you come across a passage from a mystic monk who wrote, "My soul, in reaching God, reached also my brother, and loved him with the same fire." 7s. You don't tell anyone, but you copy it into your private book. You underline it twice. Days pass. You and Ansel grow quieter together, more careful, but not distant. If anything, there's a calm between you now, a rhythm. You tend the garden in silence. He wraps your wrist after you twist it, pulling weeds. You trade candle shifts just to keep him company during night prayers. You're not sure what you are, but you know how it feels. Not scandalous, not sinful, just true. And maybe that's what scared the church most. Because beneath all their laws and sermons, they knew something. Sevens. Put two men in a quiet room long enough. Sevens. And they'll make music no one else can hear. You haven't seen a real bed in weeks. Your horse is limping. Your armour smells like a campfire and something less poetic. And all around you is sand. Blazing, endless sand. Welcome to the Crusades, where the heat isn't just coming from the sun. You're not alone, of course. Knights from every corner of Europe march beside you, sweating, swearing, sharing water and stories and the occasional eyebrow-raising glance. The Holy Land, they said. A noble cause. A chance to cleanse your soul with blood and glory. But you're starting to think that's not all people came here for. Because the Crusades weren't just about religion. They were about escape. And once you pull thousands of emotionally repressed men out of their home countries, cram them into tents, and send them marching for months through unforgiving terrain, you end up with something that looks an awful lot like a sword-heavy boys' trip with homoerotic side quests. Mainstream fact. Crusader armies were overwhelmingly male, and their campaigns lasted for years. Knights, squires, soldiers, cooks, translators, all stuck together in close quarters, sleeping in tight spaces, building deep dependencies. Brotherhood wasn't just romanticised, it was essential. An intimacy, emotional, physical, or otherwise, naturally followed. Fringe tidbit. One chronicler writing about a 12th century crusade mentions a knight who shared his tent and his body with his companion, a younger knight from Gascony. The phrase is maddeningly vague, but the tone? Not so much. The same chronicle later refers to them as inseparable, noting that when one died, the other refused to eat or speak for days. Romantic friendship. Lovers? The lines blur. Historians still argue whether these battlefield bonds crossed the line from spiritual to physical. The records are coy, sometimes on purpose. But private letters, poems, and even some military journals hint at deep devotion. In some cases, even obsession. Out here, everything feels sharper. Emotions rise fast. So do tempers. You've watched knights throw punches over stolen bread, then share a blanket 2 hours later. You've seen confessions whispered in the dark. You've heard more than one tent flap rustling suspiciously at night. And then there's him. Let's call him Etienne. He's from Burgundy. Broad shoulders, sharp wit, a smile that hits like a siege tower. You met him 3 weeks into the march, after he saved your horse from getting stuck in a ravine. Since then, he's barely left your side. You ride together, bathe in the same muddy stream, whisper jokes during Mass. One night, as you watch stars burn over the desert, he tells you he never wanted to come. His family forced him. His voice shakes. You reach for his hand. He lets you. You don't talk about it the next day. You don't have to. It becomes a rhythm. Quiet support, stolen moments, long looks. One night, while repairing armour, he presses a small stone into your palm. It's smooth, warm. For luck, he says. You don't let go of it for days. The crusade wears on. You see things you wish you hadn't. Burned villages. Rotting banners. Men you joked with yesterday now face down in dust. You fight. You win. You lose. But through it all, Etienne is there. Until he isn't. It happens fast. An ambush near a ravine. You survive. He doesn't. You sit beside his body, fingers trembling as you close his eyes. No one stops you when you lean down and kiss his forehead. No one speaks when you wrap your cloak around him and carry him to a shallow grave. Knights die. That's expected. But when you bury him, it's not just grief you feel. It's absence. Like the sun has blinked out. Later, back in camp, you write his name in the inside flap of your journal. Just his name. No flourish. No prayer. You kiss the page. And when you're finally home, months later, older, quieter, you wear the stone he gave you on a cord around your neck. People ask about it. You say it's from the Holy Land. You don't say it was a gift. You don't say you wake up some nights thinking you hear him laughing. Because love doesn't stop at borders. Or centuries. And in the heat of crusade tents, sometimes as it began. The tournament field roars with noise, cheers, metal clashing, horses snorting like steam engines. You've spent the last half hour watching knights try to knock each other into next week with decorative sticks. It's glorious. It's absurd. It's exactly what you signed up for. But your eyes keep tracking one figure. She rides like a storm. Armour gleams silver. Movements sharp. Efficient. You'd think nothing of it. Just another talented knight. Until her helmet comes off and a braid spills out. Not short-cropped like a squire's. Long, tied back, defiant. She sees you staring. She doesn't look away. You've just encountered a reality most people still don't talk about. Not all knights were men, and not all men were men. Welcome to the tangled, thrilling world of women who passed as men to fight and sometimes to love, in a society that tried very hard not to notice. Mainstream fact. Historical records contain numerous accounts of women who disguised themselves as men to serve in the military, join knightly orders, or participate in tournaments. Some were discovered, some weren't, and some lived entire lives in armour, buried under male names and titles. Take the case of Eleanor Reckner, a 14th century English trans woman who lived as Eleanor, worked as an embroiderer and sex worker, and was arrested wearing women's clothes while also being known in certain circles for passing as a man. Her surviving court record is short, but it's electric, proof that gender, even then, was more complicated than we assume. Fringe tidbit. There's a lesser-known account of a knight named Marin Laguerre, who fought in several battles across France before being revealed, after death, to have been assigned female at birth. Some say the body was buried quietly. Others say the commander insisted Marin had fought more bravely than most men, and should be honoured as such. The record's split. The truth, maybe, lives somewhere in the silence. Historians still argue whether these cases were rare anomalies or more common than we've been led to believe. Medieval record-keeping was notoriously selective. If a woman-turned knight served nobly and caused no scandal, no one had much reason to write it down. Unless they were caught, or unless they were loved. You catch her again that afternoon, sharpening her sword behind the stables. Her chestplate rests beside her, revealing the curve of her ribs through a padded tunic. You say nothing. Just offer water. She nods. Her fingers brush yours. You feel heat crawl up your neck. Later, as you sit tending a cut on your forearm, she returns the favour. Pours water over the wound. Cleans it with steady hands. You bleed quietly, she says. That's good. Sevens. You want to ask her everything. How long she's been living like this. Who trained her? Whether anyone else knows. Whether anyone else matters. But you don't. Instead, you let the silence stretch between you. You let it say what words can't. And in the days that follow, you fight beside her. You share meals. You laugh. She teaches you a new sword grip you never learned in training. You show her how to mend leather armour. And one night, beneath the stars, she leans in close and says, Sevens, I used to think I had to choose. Be strong or be seen. Maybe I don't. Sevens, you don't answer. just press your forehead to hers and exhale. Because maybe that's what chivalry always was, the freedom to be both. Not man or woman, not noble or outcast. Just a warrior, a protector, a person who chose love when the world didn't give them language for it. And when she rides out of the tournament grounds weeks later, her cloak trailing like fire behind her, you realise something. You'll remember her longer than any banner or blade. And somewhere, there's probably a ballad with the wrong name and the right heart. The crowd gathers just after sunrise, buzzing with anticipation. Nobles sip wine on temporary platforms. Commoners climb trees and waggle coins at vendors. At the centre of it all, you and another knight, circling each other in a roped-off ring of packed dirt. Heavy silence. No war this time, just a trial by combat. Justice by blade. At least, that's what everyone thinks. But you're not here over a stolen cow or slandered name. You're here because he, Sir Alaric of Northumbria, golden hair, sharper tongue, said something about your man. Not your squire, not your lord. Your man. The one whose letters are tucked beneath your tunic. The one who knows how you like your bread burnt just slightly, who braids your hair before battle, who wraps your ribs when you're too proud to admit they still hurt. He accused him of betrayal. He insulted his honour. He laughed. And you drew your sword. Mainstream fact. Trial by combat was a real legal practice in medieval Europe, particularly between the 9th and 14th centuries. Two parties, accuser and accused, would fight in sanctioned duels to let God decide who was right. Often violent, sometimes deadly, always dramatic. But not all fights were about theft or treason. Some were about something else entirely. Fringe tidbit. A 13th century German record describes a duel between two knights, both known for overlapping domestic arrangements with the same young lord. One accused the other of inappropriate affections that distracted the boy from his pious duties. They fought. The loser died. The boy later entered a monastery. The church recorded the event as a dispute over discipline, but those who lived nearby knew better. Historians still argue whether these affectional duels were ever officially recognised as romantic in nature, or whether love and jealousy simply masked themselves under the guise of honour. But either way, it happened. So here you are, facing Alaric. And it's personal. The fight begins with a clang, steel on steel, breath on frost. Your boots slip once, catch again. He's fast. You're faster. Every strike isn't just about proving innocence. It's about defending the one who stayed up all night when you were fevered. The one who ran across a battlefield to pull you from the mud. The one who whispers, "You came back to me," every time you return from a skirmish. The duel lasts longer than expected. Sweat blinds you. Your wrist aches. But when you finally disarm Alaric, your sword pressed to his throat, he doesn't beg. He just looks at you and says, quiet and bitter, "Sevens, he'll never love you like you want." Sevens, you flinch. Not because it hurts, but because it's true. You step back. You've won. But it doesn't feel like victory. Later, in the quiet of your tent, you stare at your bloodied gauntlets and wonder if you were fighting him, or the feeling that you've always been just half seen. Then the tent flap opens, and there he is. The man this all started for. He doesn't speak. He just kneels, takes your hands, and presses his lips to your knuckles, one at a time. And maybe that's his answer. The world around you still insists on disguises, calling love loyalty, calling longing devotion. But inside the ring, with swords drawn, the truth comes out. Stripped of poetry. Raw. Real. You didn't fight for honour. You fought for him. And tonight, when he lays beside you, still clothed, still silent, you let your fingers rest against his chest just to feel his breath. Because not all love needs words. Some love just needs a duel. Smoke curls from the incense burners, slow and ghostly. Candles flicker along the nave like tiny beacons, painting gold light across the stone floor. You kneel in a chapel tucked inside some forgotten village, head bowed, not for battle, not for sin, but for something harder to name. You're lighting a candle to a saint. Not St. George or St. Michael, those usual sword-swinging suspects. No, this one is different. This saint, quietly whispered about by monks with soft eyes and ink-stained hands, blurs lines. Between man and woman, between piety and passion, between body and soul. Because believe it or not, the medieval world had queer saints and gender-bending martyrs, even if no one wrote that part in the stained glass captions. Mainstream fact. The hagiographies, those dramatic, often miraculous biographies of saints, are full of saints who defied gender norms or lived lives of intense same-gender affection. Some women dressed as men to join monasteries and were only discovered after death. Some male saints were remembered for spiritual bonds that sound suspiciously romantic. One of the most famous is St. Marino's, assigned female at birth, but joined a monastery disguised as a man. Marinos lived, worked, and prayed as a monk for years. When accused of fathering a child, long story involving a very determined innkeeper's daughter, Marinos took the blame and raised the child inside the monastery, never revealing the truth. Only after death did anyone find out. The church canonized Marinos anyway. Fringe tidbit. There's a 10th century account of two male saints, Sergius and Bacchus, Roman soldiers and early Christian martyrs, often depicted side by side. One ancient manuscript describes them as arastai, a Greek word meaning lovers. Later church scribes changed that to companions, but the earliest version doesn't lie quietly. In icons, they're still shown together, sometimes with Christ standing between them like a wedding officiant. Historians still argue how to interpret these relationships. Were they spiritual brothers? Political allies? Secret lovers canonized because their devotion couldn't be denied, even if no one dared name it. You walk the stone aisle, your boots echoing between the pillars. The chapel is nearly empty. Just an old woman lighting a votive and a boy asleep on a bench. You approach the side altar, where a faded painting shows two saints embracing, their halos nearly touching. It doesn't look like platonic piety. It looks like love, radiant and eternal. You remember the knight from your youth, the one who taught you to ride, who pressed a kiss to your temple when you panicked before your first tourney. He prayed every morning, sang every psalm, and once wept openly during a sermon about divine union. You never saw him again after he left for pilgrimage. But in your heart, you've always lit candles for him. You do so now. The flame flickers to life. A small offering. A quiet rebellion. Because while the church preached against unnatural love, its walls held the stories of people who didn't fit neatly into categories. People who were loved because of their strangeness, not in spite of it. People like you. In your saddlebag, folded between maps and sharpened quills, is a worn piece of parchment. A list of saints no one ever talks about. Some were canonized, some erased. But their names live on, in whispers, in secret symbols, in the private prayers of those who know. And tonight, you whisper one more. You pray not just for safety, not just for honour, but for truth, the kind that doesn't have to hide behind incense and Latin. Outside, the wind picks up. The bell tolls once, and somewhere, in heaven or memory, sevens, two saints hold hands without shame. You've written sonnets before, bad ones, the kind with too many rhymes and not enough meaning, but this time, the words come easy. You sit in your tent, quill scratching gently across parchment, and instead of writing to some noblewoman you've never met, you're writing to the person who taught you to joust. A man. Not just any man, the man. The one who laughed when you fell off your horse the first time, then offered his hand and said, "You'll get it." The one who once fixed your helm strapped mid-charge and later shared his wine with you under the stars. He smells like leather and pine. And right now, he's somewhere down the road, riding into a skirmish you couldn't join because of your cracked ribs. So, you write. Because it's the only thing that feels like breathing. You call him my heart's match, even though you'll probably burn this letter. You thank him for that time he stayed up sharpening your blade when you were too exhausted to move. You remember the way he fell asleep against your shoulder last winter and how you didn't dare shift even as your arm went numb. You write it all down. You don't even try to make it sound tough. Because courtly love in medieval times wasn't always straight, no matter what they told you in school. Mainstream fact. The tradition of courtly love, romanticised longing, often from afar, dominated European literature from the 12th to 14th centuries. Knights wrote poems, songs, and stories about unattainable loves, usually framed as noble women. But not always. Plenty of medieval love poetry uses neutral or even masculine pronouns. And in certain manuscripts, the intended object of affection is left deliberately ambiguous. In Arabic, Hebrew, and some old French texts, the line between friend and lover is just wide enough to hide in. Fringe tidbit. A 13th century Occitan troubadour named Bernard de Ventadorn wrote verses to another man, describing his eyes as torches that burn my will. Some scholars insist it was metaphor. Others point out that Bernard wrote dozens of poems, and only one names a woman directly, or the rest. Let's just say they sound like softboy open mic night at the local feudal tavern. Historians still argue whether queer courtly love was intentional, or if later readers just projected meaning onto poetic conventions. But that assumes medieval people didn't know how subtext worked. They did. Some of them were experts. Back in your tent, you finish your letter. You don't sign it with your name, just an initial and a sketch of the tiny symbol the two of you carved into your saddle horns. A crescent moon between two crossed swords. You tuck it inside a saddlebag. You may never send it. Or maybe you will, next time the wind feels brave. Because love, real love, wasn't always about marriage or heirs. Sometimes it was just about longing, the ache of absence, the thrill of seeing him across the field and pretending your heart didn't leap like a damned lute string. There's a poem making the rounds in your camp, supposedly by a knight who died in battle. It's short, 7s. He taught me to ride and left before I could say thank you. He looked at me once like I was more than my sword. I hope heaven lets me see him again. 7s. You know that feeling. Because tonight, as you wrap a cloak tight around your shoulders and stare into the fire, you don't miss the glory. You don't miss the thrill. You just miss him. And you write it down. Because in this world, that's what knights do. They love, they bleed, 7s, and they leave behind words that tremble like armour in the wind. You duck under the stable arch to avoid a streak of pigeon droppings overhead, and slip into a narrow barn stall where your favourite scribe, yes, the one with ink-stained fingertips and a glint in his eye, is hiding from the world with something scandalous. He's got a scroll and a smirk. It's French, he says, unrolling the parchment. Not for church eyes. 7s. He reads the first line aloud, and it's... well, it's a lot. There's a knight, a bathhouse, and let's just say there's a very enthusiastic sword polishing scene that does not involve actual swords. Congratulations. You've stumbled upon something that most people don't realise existed. Medieval queer erotica written by knights, about knights. Mainstream fact. Courtly romance and poetic longing weren't the only things being penned behind monastery walls and castle chambers. Some knights, and the scribes or poets who admired them, wrote stories and verses that were openly sensual, occasionally explicit, and not always aimed at women. A few of these works survived. Most didn't. But the ones that did? Whew. Take the romance of the Knight of the Tower, which, while mostly a morality guide, also includes multiple passages warning knights not to embrace one another in bed, or kiss too fondly in armour. You know what that means? People were definitely doing it. Fringe tidbit. One of the spiciest surviving examples comes from a 14th century manuscript fragment found in modern-day Belgium. It's a partially erased poem written in Old French, describing a moonless night where two champions met by firelight, and one's hands strayed beyond the borders of brotherhood. No names. No authorship. Just heat. Historians still argue how widespread this kind of writing was, and whether it represented lived realities or literary fantasy. But even if it was all fantasy, whose fantasy exactly? Because someone, somewhere, copied this with a quill in one hand and some feelings in the other. Back in your stall, the scribe finishes reading. He raises an eyebrow at you, waiting for your reaction. You're flushed, trying not to look like you're intrigued. You make some joke about bad poetry. He nods, then asks, Sevens, would you write me something better? Sevens, you laugh, because you don't write. You fight. But that night, alone in your tent, you sharpen a quill and start anyway. You begin with a line about armour left in a pile, then a pair of hands, unbuckling a belt. You stop before it gets too obvious, mostly, but you reread it 3 times before tucking it inside your journal. You don't know what you'll do with it. Maybe give it to the scribe next time you pass through. Maybe burn it. Maybe nothing. But it feels like a release. Like a truth you haven't let yourself say out loud. In battle, you perform strength. In court, you perform control. But here, in ink, you get to feel. And you're not alone. Because tucked in castle libraries, buried in footnotes, and half erased by prudish scribes, other knights wrote the same things. Not all of them were noble. Some were desperate. Some were brave. Some were just horny. But all of them were real. This isn't some modern lens distorting the past. This is the past whispering back, in parchment and poetry. Sevens. We were here. We wanted. We wrote it down. And maybe you'll keep writing. Quietly. Carefully. Or maybe not. Maybe you'll find other ways to say it. Through the way you watch him walk away. Through the way you hold him too long after a wound. Through the way you flinch at sermons about fire and brimstone. Or maybe, one day, someone else will read your words, centuries from now, and understand. That even in a world of armour and silence, some knights still dared to speak. You kneel before the altar, not in prayer, but in initiation. The hall is dark, thick with incense and secrets. A circle of men surrounds you, every face half shadowed by torchlight. They wear white mantles stamped with blood-red crosses. This isn't just any brotherhood. This is the order of the Knights Templar, and you're about to swear an oath that binds you more tightly than any marriage ever could. The words are ancient. Latin, French, sometimes whispered in both. You're asked if you're willing to give up everything. Wealth, land, titles, even the comfort of women. You say yes. They ask if you will love your brothers as yourself, and protect them with your life. You say yes. Then one of them leans close, so close you feel his breath, and says, "Then rise, my brother, and fear no man." Sevens. And just like that, you're one of them. Mainstream fact. The Knights Templar were a powerful and mysterious Catholic military order founded in the early 12th century. Sworn to chastity, poverty, and obedience, they lived communally, fought as an elite force in the Crusades, and became staggeringly wealthy and influential across Europe. They also slept 2 to a bed. No, seriously. Templar rules, based on the Latin rule of the order, explicitly mention 2 brothers shall sleep in the same bed, so that one may guard the other. You're not allowed to sleep alone unless you're sick or penitent. Even the Pope was chill with this. Fringe tidbit. In 1307, when King Philip IV of France orchestrated the downfall of the Templars, the charges weren't just political. They included accusations of indecent kisses, unnatural vice, and swearing oaths upon the naked buttocks of initiates. Many historians consider these claims propaganda to justify land seizure, but the wording's awfully specific. Historians still argue whether the Templars were truly engaging in queer acts, or whether the accusations were fabricated as part of Philip's smear campaign. But whether truth or slander, the allegations didn't come from nowhere. Something about the Order's intimacy made people uncomfortable. Because here's the thing, Templars weren't just soldiers. They lived together in tight quarters, shared food, beds, and emotional intensity. Oaths of spiritual brotherhood? Check. Physical closeness encouraged? Check. Touch-starved knights sleeping side by side in a vow of celibate devotion to God and each other? Also check. Back in your cell that night, you lie beside your assigned bedmate. Let's call him Renaud. He's already half asleep, his breath slow, arm brushing yours. You can feel the heat of his body through the linen shift. You could shift away. You don't. Renaud murmurs, "You held your ground today." "Sevens," you whisper back, "only because I knew you were behind me." "Sevens." He smiles in the dark. You feel it before you see it. The bond between you isn't about lust. It's about survival. It's about trust forged in blood and prayer and silence. But sometimes, when his hand finds yours beneath the blanket, and your fingers curl around his without thought, it feels like more. You train together, confess together, bleed together, and in the quiet of the Templar chapter house, where no woman has ever stepped, you learn a different kind of intimacy. One that hides behind rules, one that breathes in the in-between. You never speak of what happens when he weeps in your arms after a failed mission. You never question why he grips your wrist a little too tightly before battle. You never admit you know the way his breath hitches when you say his name. Because love inside the Templars doesn't wear a label. It wears a mantle. It swings a sword, and it dies in silence if it has to. Eventually, you both take your final vows, not of marriage, but of loyalty, of surrender, of total, unquestioning devotion, to the Order, to each other, and when the day comes that they call you heretics, arrest you, accuse you of forbidden things, you meet Renaud's eyes across the cold stone cell. You do not speak. You do not explain. You just reach out your hand, and he takes it. Because whatever they say, about kisses, about bodies, about sins, they'll never understand what you were. Not lovers, not criminals, just two knights in an order built on silence. Sevens, who loved each other louder than history would allow. You stand at the edge of the square, hands clenched at your sides, heart racing, not from fear for yourself, but for him. The wooden stocks creak as the town constable drags your friend, your companion, into place. His hair's matted, his tunic's torn. You barely recognize him beneath the bruises. The crowd gathers fast. Whispers morph into snarls. Someone throws a turnip. Another spits. And over the din, the bailiff bellows a charge that sends a chill down your spine. Sevens. Sodomy. That word, heavy as chainmail, vague, brutal, and wielded like a blade. You hear it and know exactly what this punishment is really about. Not just what he did, but who he is. Who he dared to love. Or maybe just who he was caught being too close to. Maybe that someone was you. Mainstream fact. In the Middle Ages, sodomy was a legal term as slippery as it was devastating. It could refer to a wide range of behaviours, not all sexual, not all consensual, and not always clearly defined. But in practice, it was often used to police same-sex intimacy between men, particularly when it became too visible, too affectionate, or too public. The church preached sermons condemning it as this sin against nature. Laws varied wildly across Europe. In some cities, you'd get fined or whipped. In others, Florence, for instance, you might be executed. And accusations didn't always require evidence. Gossip, jealousy, or even just a poorly timed hug could end a man's life. Fringe tidbit. In 15th century Zurich, a man named Heinrich had his home searched after being observed in close company with another man. They found nothing but letters, soft, personal, emotional. No explicit content. Just lines like, "I miss your silence more than any song." He was still imprisoned for a year. His letters were burned. Historians still argue about how widespread actual prosecution was. Some cities had sodomy courts. Florence's infamous Ufficiali di Notte kept meticulous records of arrests, mostly of working-class men and teenagers. Nobles, of course, were usually shielded unless they made too much noise. Your friend made noise, or someone made it for him. You stand among the crowd, helpless as the guard reads a confession, probably extracted under torture. He's fined, flogged, and marched through the streets wearing a shame mask. Iron, grotesque, with a pig's snout and devil's horns. The children laugh. The adults don't. No one wants to look too sympathetic. That's dangerous. You keep your distance, but you don't leave. Because weeks ago, on a quiet hill at dusk, he pressed his forehead to yours and whispered something. He said your name like it was a vow. And you didn't stop him. You remember his hands, shaking after a skirmish. The way he read prayers so softly you wondered if he was reciting your name instead. The way his breath caught when you stood too close, and how you pretended not to notice, just so he'd stay brave. And now, he's paraded like a monster for what everyone else pretends isn't common. Because the truth? This happened all the time. People noticed, but they looked away, until it became too hard to ignore. Until someone needed a scapegoat, or someone got jealous, or someone powerful wanted to feel righteous. You see it in the faces around you. Not hatred, fear. Not moral outrage, projection. Because they know. They've seen knights share beds. They've read those poems. They've heard the gasps behind church doors. They know. They've just decided never to say it out loud. That night, you sneak to the infirmary where he's been locked. You slip a flask into his hand. He sips it in silence. His lashes are crusted with blood. You don't ask what happened. You just say, "I didn't walk away." Sevens. And he nods, slowly. That's why I'm still breathing. Sevens. You don't kiss him. Not here. Not now. But you press your hand to his. Not a gesture of romance, but one of defiance. Because in a world that punishes affection, sevens, even gentleness is rebellion. You leave just before dawn. He'll recover. Probably. But you know something's broken now. Not between you, but between you and the world. A wall cracked open. A truth made visible. And while others might retreat into silence, you can't. You won't. You'll train harder. Fight smarter. Rise through the ranks. Not to blend in, but to build a kind of armour that isn't made of steel. One made of witnessing. Because someone has to remember what they tried to erase. Someone has to hold on to the love that never got to speak. It's late. The castle's gone quiet. Just the occasional crack of the hearth or the soft clink of goblets left half-drunk on sideboards. You know this place like your own armour. Which halls to avoid when the nobles are drunk. Which tapestries conceal draughts. And, most importantly, which door always stays open for the king's favourite. Sevens. That's where you're headed now. Because tonight, the king isn't alone. Again. The man who holds court by day now shares his bed with a different kind of power. A companion who doesn't wear a crown but wields more influence than half the kingdom. Mainstream fact. The term royal favourite in medieval and early modern Europe referred to a noble or courtier who held unusually close, personal access to a monarch, often accompanied by titles, wealth, and luxurious private quarters. Many favourites were male, and more than a few had relationships with their kings that went beyond politics. Edward II of England had Piers Gaveston. Richard II had Robert de Vere. James V of England, yes, the Bible guy, had George Villiers, Duke of Buckingham, whom he once described in a letter as my sweet child and wife. Fringe tidbit. French King Henri III installed a row of velvet-draped beds inside his chamber for his mignons, young, stylish favourites who wore makeup, earrings, and expensive perfumes. He gave them estates, let them help make law. And once, when one was insulted in public, the king wept at court and declared, "He was the mirror of my heart." Sevens. Historians still argue whether these relationships were physically romantic, politically expedient, or both. Some insist they were platonic, just unusually intense. Others say the paper trail of poetry, portraits, and palace renovations tells a very different story. But tonight, you see it for yourself. You pause outside the royal chambers. Voices inside, low, close. Not the clipped rhythm of policy, but something softer, familiar. You know that tone. You've used it yourself, once, in a tent far from here, whispering someone's name like a spell. You're not eavesdropping. Not exactly. But you are waiting. Because the king's favourite, his constant companion, is your old friend. Let's call him Thomas. You grew up with him, trained beside him, shared your first flask of wine under a crumbling tower with him. And now he wears fine velvet instead of armour. He dines with the court while you drill recruits in the mud. But when he sees you, he still smiles like nothing's changed. Except it has. He's in there. And you're still out here. Eventually the door opens. He steps out, rumpled, flushed, avoiding your eyes. You hand him the report he asked for. Pretend not to see the mark on his neck. Pretend your throat doesn't tighten. He says thank you. He hesitates. Then, walk with me. Sevens. You do. In the garden, moonlight slicing through vines. He finally says it. It's not what you think. Sevens. You raise an eyebrow. He sighs. Okay, maybe it is. Sevens. You sit beside him on a stone bench, damp with dew. He's quiet for a long time. Then he says, he listens. Really listens. Not like the others. Sevens. And you know exactly what he means. Because sometimes power doesn't look like a sword or a throne. It looks like being seen, heard, held without judgment. The castle will keep whispering. Courtiers will keep fuming. But for now, Thomas is safe. Powerful, even, not because of armour, but because he's claimed something most men are never allowed. Affection without apology. You don't envy him. Not exactly. But you remember when you used to braid his hair after drills. When he once fell asleep beside you, hand on your chest, whispering, "Don't leave first." Sevens. You never did. Tonight, you part ways with a nod. Nothing more. But you keep thinking about the chamber wing added to the king's apartments. How it bears no title. How the servants call it the favourite's room. Sevens. And how sometimes history erases these stories by calling them politics. By calling it friendship. By ignoring the soft touches and warm glances that lit entire regimes. But you won't forget. Because in palaces and prisons alike, sevens, love found a way in. Sevens, even when the scribes pretended not to see. The wedding is beautiful, in that stiff, suffocating way noble weddings always are. Rich fabrics, solemn music, faces you've never seen pretending to be thrilled. The bride wears a dress that probably weighs more than your shield. She glances your way once, twice, nervous, maybe suspicious. But not of you. You're just the groom's oldest friend. No one suspects you're also the one he's in love with. Because marriage in the Middle Ages was rarely about passion. It was about politics. Alliances, dowries, inheritance. Who owned what? Who controlled whom? Love had no place in it, at least not publicly. You stand beside him at the altar, dressed in ceremonial armour you didn't ask to wear. Your heart beats like war drums. He avoids your eyes. When the priest says, for better or worse, your throat clenches. Mainstream fact. Among the medieval nobility, marriage was a strategic contract. Most noblemen didn't choose their wives, fathers, uncles, or even monarchs did that for them. And while some couples grew to love each other, many didn't. Emotional fulfillment. That wasn't the goal. Producing heirs and securing property. That was fringe tidbit. In a 14th century love letter, never meant for public eyes, a knight writes, "My heart is married, but not to her. I smile at her by day and dream of you by night." It was found hidden inside a wooden writing box behind a false panel. The recipient was another man. We don't know their names, but the paper still smells faintly of rose oil and ink. Historians still argue about how often noblemen had male lovers alongside their wives, and whether these relationships were accepted or simply tolerated as long as they stayed quiet. Some records suggest it was common, just never openly acknowledged. At the feast, your knight, your friend, your everything, laughs on cue, lifts his goblet, kisses his new bride's cheek like a trained actor. He does it well. Too well. You slip away. Outside, the air is sharp with autumn. Leaves skitter across the cobbles like they're trying to escape too. You lean against a stone column, not sure if you want to be sick or vanish. Then you hear his footsteps. He doesn't speak. Just stands beside you, shoulder to shoulder, staring out into the garden like it might save him. Finally, he says, "I didn't want this." Sevens. You don't say. Then why did you let it happen? You know the answer. Instead, you say, "He looked happy." Sevens. He snorts. "I'm a knight. I can fake anything." Sevens. And he turns to you. His eyes, glassy but dry. "I'll still find you. At night. When it's safe." Sevens. Your heart twists. That's the problem. There's never a safe time. You want to say you'll wait. But you've already been waiting. Through months of whispers. Through nights of shared glances and nothing else. Through promises made in the dark and broken in daylight. So you ask, what happens when she figures it out? Sevens. He doesn't answer. And that's the truth right there. You're not the one wearing a wedding ring. You're just the one holding his real vows. You return to your tent that night alone. You take off the ceremonial armour. Fold it like it matters. Then you open a wooden box and take out something older than this marriage, older than most of your memories. A carved ring. Simple. Unadorned. The one he gave you when you were both squires, huddled in the stables to avoid a snowstorm. He said it wasn't a real promise, just a temporary thing. Sevens. You still wear it. He never stopped calling it yours. Sevens. Marriage, in this world, isn't about love. Love lives in the in-between, in letters that don't get sent, in the pause before a kiss that never lands, in the way he looked at you just before he said "I do," as if asking for permission he'd already given away. But you stay, not because it's easy, because even when it breaks your heart, Sevens, you'd rather be near him than anywhere else. The hall is loud, too loud. Laughter rings off the stone walls, goblets clink, someone's playing a lute badly in the corner. But in the chaos, your eyes lock with his from across the room. And then it happens. He tugs his pinky ring. Just once. You exhale, subtle as a prayer. Because here in this court, affection wears disguises. You don't say "I miss you." You don't say "meet me after dark." You say it with signals, codes, rings, touches, glances that say everything and nothing at once. It's how love survives. Mainstream fact. In a society obsessed with hierarchy and appearances, personal feelings, especially queer ones, had to be tucked beneath layers of etiquette. That didn't stop people from expressing them. It just meant they had to get creative. Symbols of affection were everywhere. Matching rings, knotted ribbons, carved wooden tokens, scented handkerchiefs. Medieval courts ran on subtlety. If you knew what to look for, it was everywhere. Fringe tidbit. In 14th century Aragon, a nobleman was buried with a brooch engraved with the name of another knight, not his heir, wife, or lord. Just a simple pin, engraved on the underside. Scholars argue over what it meant. The fact that it was hidden suggests he knew exactly what it meant, and who it was for. Historians still argue whether these signs were personal or political. Couldn't a brooch just be a gift? Couldn't a handkerchief be friendship? Sure. But then again, why hide it? Why wear it always, even into battle, tucked under your breastplate? Back in the Great Hall, you casually adjust your belt, not because it's loose, but because it's your signal. One loop, then twist. It means follow me soon. You leave the room a few minutes later, not looking back. He finds you in the corridor outside the library, the one that's always empty after dinner. No words, just the familiar flicker in his eyes. That same flicker that's been burning since your training days, when he'd press his shoulder against yours during drills and murmur corrections too softly for anyone else to hear. Tonight, he wears a thin copper chain with a carved token tucked beneath his collar. You've never asked what it is. You don't need to. You've both played this game long enough to know its rules. Sevens. Never linger too long. Never touch when someone might see. Never say what it is, even when it's obvious. He hands you something, small, round, smooth. A polished piece of bone carved into a circle, marked with a simple X. You frown. What does it mean? Sevens. He leans in, lips close enough to brush your cheek, and whispers, "I remember the first time I saw you fall asleep against my shoulder." Sevens. You say nothing. Just hold the token tighter. You have your own signals, of course. You wear your ring on your right hand instead of your left. You always use the same phrase, "May your horse keep steady," before battle. Only he knows it means I love you. Please, come back. And when he doesn't return it, that's his way of saying I will. This is what court life does to you. It trains you to speak in riddles and look away too fast. You become fluent in the unsaid. You pass messages in embroidered borders and fake arguments. You count steps between you at banquets. 7 steps is safe. 6 means I need to see you. 5 is too dangerous. Tonight, after he leaves, you slip the carved token into a hidden seam in your belt lining. You'll wear it always now. Not because you're sentimental. Because when everything else falls apart, your title, your position, the lies you have to tell to keep your place, these little gestures are the only things you own. Tomorrow, someone will toast to your courage. They'll call you honourable, loyal, strong. But only one man in this castle knows the real code. 7s, that you once said everything. 7s, without ever being caught saying anything at all. The priest's voice cracks like thunder across the chapel. The sin cries out to heaven. He slams his hand against the pulpit as if the wood itself must repent. You sit stiff in the pew, barely breathing, a damp chill seeping into your bones even though the room is packed and sweating. You know exactly what he's talking about. He doesn't say you, not directly, but every word feels like a blade aimed straight at your chest. The unnatural vice, the filth of Sodom, the fire, the punishment, the divine wrath that, if the priest's tone is anything to go by, is already licking at your heels. You glance across the aisle and meet his eyes. Just for a moment. He looks away. Because now, more than ever, the church is panicking and you're in the crosshairs. Mainstream fact. By the 13th century, Western Europe was seeing a sharp uptick in what scholars now call the sodomy scare, driven by church reform movements, new legal codes, and public morality campaigns. Authorities began hunting down so-called sodomites, a catch-all term for anyone engaging in non-procreative sexual acts, particularly between men. This wasn't just religious. It was institutional. In 1254, King Louis IX of France ordered the public execution of men accused of sodomy, burned alive. The same year, the Dominican order expanded its focus on rooting out moral corruption, often turning over suspects to secular courts. The line between sin and crime vanished. Fringe tidbit. In Florence, the Ufficiali di Notte, officers of the night, was an actual policing body created solely to investigate and prosecute cases of sodomy. They kept records of hundreds of trials, most involving young men. Some were fined. Others were publicly shamed. A few vanished from the records completely. Historians still argue over how many of these prosecutions were based on genuine investigation versus hearsay, revenge, or political sabotage. The truth is slippery, because fear spreads faster than facts, and silence is the safest defence. So now, you sit through sermons where entire cities are blamed for the infection of unnatural affection. Fires are described in graphic detail. Hell becomes not a metaphor, but a looming reality, especially for those who look too long at the wrong person. You flinch as the priest bellows, "Better to be maimed in this life than burn in the next." Sevens. He means you, or someone like you, or anyone who has ever held another man's face in the quiet and dared to hope. Later, outside the chapel, townsfolk nod in approval. One mutters something about cleansing the rot. You grit your teeth. You don't respond. But the fear isn't just theirs, it's yours, too. You start walking differently, laughing less. You flinch when someone touches your shoulder. You stop wearing the ring he gave you, even though it still lives in your cloak pocket. You stop writing letters. You sleep alone, even when the nights are long and cold. Even when you ache to be near him. Because the fires are real, and so are the eyes watching. And the church doesn't just condemn from pulpits, it erases. It rewrites. It purifies the past by bleaching it white, straight, holy. It turns saints into solitary hermits, lovers into close friends, knights into soulless soldiers. It cuts out your name and replaces it with silence. But one night, alone in the chapel, you light a candle. It's not for a saint. It's for the man you once whispered to beneath the banner of your house. The one whose breath used to steady your shaking hands. The one who now won't look at you in public. You don't pray. Just sit there, hands open, letting the wax drip slowly onto your skin. Because you remember what the priest forgot. Sevens. That love doesn't need permission to exist. That fire burns. Yes, but it also illuminates. And sometimes it leaves behind truth instead of ash. You walk out into the night, and for the first time in weeks, you look back. He's standing in the shadows of the chapel door, watching, waiting, and though neither of you moves, sevens, neither of you runs. You're older now. Your sword arm isn't what it used to be. Your knee creaks when you kneel, and your hair, what's left of it, catches the wind like dry straw. You've seen kings rise and fall, banners torn to ribbons, friends buried in shallow graves with no names. And still, you ride. But the world has changed, and it's changing faster than you can sharpen a blade. No more torchlit vows in crumbling chapels. No more whispered Latin blessings shared between brothers who meant more than brotherhood. No more excuses to touch someone's hand for too long. The codes are being rewritten. The masks are coming on. And the stories, they're being cleaned. Mainstream fact. By the 16th century, as the Renaissance bloomed and the Protestant Reformation took hold, European attitudes towards sexuality hardened. Church doctrine turned more rigid. Sodomy became more aggressively prosecuted. Emotional male bonds, once celebrated in knightly culture, began to look suspicious, even dangerous. The tight physical affection of medieval men, kisses, embraces, shared beds, started vanishing from public view. New standards of masculinity crept in. Colder, distant, armoured in shame. Fringe tidbit. In one 17th century English manuscript, a scribe revising older knightly romances simply crossed out phrases like "he lay in his companion's arms" and replaced them with "he was comforted by his friend." Whole verses of emotional language disappeared, rewritten to fit the new ideals of masculinity and purity. The ink still shows through beneath the corrections. Historians still argue when exactly the closet formed, this cultural phenomenon where queerness became something hidden, dangerous, shameful. But most agree that it wasn't always this way. There was a time when knights could write poetry to one another, swear oaths of loyalty with hands pressed to hearts, sleep side by side under stars and not be questioned. You remember those days. You lived them. Now, you live in a world where younger knights mock softness. They scoff at the old songs. They joke about bachelor nights like it's a punchline, not a reality. They use the word companion with that dry, ironic smile that tells you they've already forgotten what it used to mean. You don't blame them. Not really. History is a battlefield too, and your side's been losing for a long time. But some nights, when the hall is empty and the fire's burned low, you pull a letter from your satchel. The ink is faded, the corners curled. It's from him. You never showed anyone. Never needed to. Just one sentence. Sevens. If they ever write us down, I hope they get it wrong enough to protect you. Sevens. You think about that a lot. And you know, deep down, he was right. Because they did write you down. But they filed you under brotherhood and loyalty. They called it noble sacrifice. They said it was friendship, chivalry, camaraderie. They missed the way your hands trembled when you touched his collarbone, the way your breath caught when he laughed, the way you felt more alive curled beside him on a battlefield than anywhere else on earth. They missed all of it, or they ignored it. But you remember, and that's enough. So now, as the last candle flickers in the corner of your mind, you let yourself slow down. You unclench your jaw. Let your breath come soft and steady. Maybe even smile, just a little. Because this history, the real one, the messy one, the one they tried to bury under centuries of stone and silence, it didn't vanish. It lived in letters, in poems, in glances, in dreams passed from one quiet heart to another. And it lives in you, now. You carry the story of men who loved boldly, even when they couldn't say the words, of warriors who shared beds and secrets, of orders and oaths forged not just in loyalty, but in longing. You know now that the medieval world wasn't sterile or straight or simple. It was tangled, emotional, surprisingly tender. You won't find these truths carved into church walls or gilded in stained glass, but they hum in the background of every battlefield. They flicker between the lines of every ballad. They echo in the silence after every knight says, "I die for him," and means it. So as you lie there, eyes soft in the dark, maybe you see it. The moonlight on his cheek. The shape of a hand reaching for yours. The warmth of something ancient and deeply human, still alive beneath all that armour. Sleep now. You've earned it. The world is quieter here. And in this quiet, nothing, not even time, can erase who you really were. End of script. Sweet dreams.